Most people don't fail at building wealth because they lack intelligence, opportunity, or information. They fail because they never gave themselves a reason strong enough to work when it's uncomfortable. Because here's the truth: human beings don't move because of logic. They move because of emotion. And right now, your nervous system is perfectly trained to protect your comfort, not to create wealth. So until pain is linked to staying where you are, and pleasure is linked to discipline, action, nothing changes. This is the moment you stop waiting for motivation and learn how to create it. Most people think wealth is something you chase. They think it's out there somewhere attached to the right strategy, the right timing, the right connection, the right break. And so they keep searching, they keep learning, they keep consuming information, but they never quite cross the line into becoming the person who actually produces wealth consistently. And the reason is simple. Even if it's uncomfortable to hear, money doesn't respond to desire. It responds to identity. You don't get wealthy because you want more money. You get wealthy because you decide at the deepest level who you are and what you stand for. Because long before income changes, self-image changes. Long before bank accounts grow, standards rise. And long before results show up on the outside, there is a quiet internal decision that says, this is who I am now, and I don't negotiate with that right now. Whether you realize it or not, you are living in alignment with an identity. Every action you take or avoid comes from it. If you see yourself as someone who tries, you'll try. If you see yourself as someone who waits, you'll wait. If you see yourself as someone who works hard only when it feels good, then the moment it gets uncomfortable, your behavior collapses. Not because you're weak, but because your identity hasn't been upgraded. And here is what most people miss. Your brain's number one job is not to make you rich. It's to keep you consistent with who you believe you are. So if deep down you see wealth as something for other people, your mind will sabotage you every time you get close. You'll procrastinate, you'll hesitate, you'll overthink. You'll suddenly feel tired, distracted, unsure. Not because the opportunity is wrong, but because your identity is trying to protect itself. That's why some people can have less talent, less education, less luck, and still out-earn everyone around them. It's not because they're smarter. It's because they decided who they are. They don't see discipline as effort. They don't see hard work as punishment. They don't see sacrifice as loss. To them, it's just normal. It's just who they are. And the moment you understand this, everything shifts. Because wealth doesn't require you to be perfect. It requires you to be consistent. And consistency doesn't come from motivation. It comes from identity. You don't wake up every day asking yourself, do I feel like brushing my teeth? You do it because that's who you are. It's non-negotiable. And the same must become true with your work ethic, your learning, your focus, and your execution. The problem is, most people are trying to build wealth on top of an identity built for survival. An identity shaped by playing it safe, an identity trained to avoid risk, avoid failure, avoid judgment. And then they wonder why they can't push themselves when it matters. They wonder why they keep falling back into old habits. They wonder why progress feels temporary. You don't rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your identity every single time. So the real question isn't, how do I make more money? The real question is, who must I become so making more money is inevitable? Who is the version of you that doesn't wait for permission? Who is the version of you that shows up even when the excitement fades? Who is the version of you that finishes what they start? Because once that identity is clear, behavior follows naturally. This is why affirmations don't work for most people. They say, I am wealthy, but their identity screams, I'm barely surviving. The nervous system doesn't respond to words. It responds to evidence. And every time you keep a promise to yourself, especially when it's hard, you provide proof. Proof that you are disciplined. Proof that you are reliable. Proof that you are becoming someone new. And that proof compounds. The first time you work, when you don't feel like it, you feel resistance. The second time, it's uncomfortable. The third time, it's familiar. And eventually it becomes normal. That's identity being rewired. Wealthy people aren't superhuman. They're conditioned. Conditioned to take action under pressure. Conditioned to delay gratification. Conditioned to think long-term when everyone else is chasing comfort in the short term. And conditioning doesn't happen in a moment. It happens through repeated decisions that align with a higher standard. So you stop asking, what's the fastest way to make money? And you start asking, what would the wealthier version of me do today? Would that version scroll for hours? Would that version quit because it got difficult? Would that version wait to feel confident? Or would that version take the call, do the work, learn the skill, make the move even with uncertainty present? This is where everything turns, because the moment you stop trying to feel wealthy and start acting like someone who expects results, your energy changes, your posture changes, your communication changes. Opportunities start responding to you differently, not because the world changed, but because you did. And here's the final piece most people never hear. Identity is not something you find. It's something you decide. You decide who you are through action. You decide through standards. You decide through what you tolerate and what you refuse to tolerate anymore. You don't wait for confidence, you build it. You don't wait for motivation, you create it. You don't wait to feel ready. You become the kind of person who moves anyway. And when that shift happens, when your identity locks in, wealth stops being a dream and start becoming a byproduct. Because once you decide who you are, your future has no choice but to follow. Now let's go deeper, because this is where real leverage lies. This is where behavior actually changes. Every decision you've ever made about money, work, effort, saving, spending, risk, and growth has been driven by two forces, whether you're conscious of it or not: pain and pleasure. That's it. No exceptions. Human beings will do more to avoid pain than they will ever do to gain pleasure. And until you understand how this is shaping your financial life, you'll keep repeating patterns you swear you want to break. Right now, your nervous system is constantly running calculations. Not logical ones, emotional ones. It's asking what will hurt and what will feel good. And whichever answer feels stronger in the moment wins. That's why you can genuinely want wealth and still choose comfort. That's why you can have big AMS and still hit snooze. That's why you can promise yourself that today will be different, then find yourself doing the same things by nightfall. Yeah, it's not because you're lazy. It's because pain and pleasure are miswired. For most people, hard work is unconsciously linked to pain. They associate it with stress, exhaustion, pressure, sacrifice, and missing out. And at the same time, staying where they are feels familiar, predictable, safe. So even if they complain about their financial situation, the pain of change feels greater than the pain of staying the same. And as long as that equation exists, no amount of willpower will save you, because willpower is a finite resource. Emotional conditioning is not. Think about it. If staying broke or just getting by truly hurt enough, you would change. If procrastination genuinely scared you, you'd stop. If wasted potential felt unbearable, you'd move. The fact that you haven't yet doesn't mean you don't care. It means the pain hasn't become real enough in your body. Most people keep their pain abstract. They say things like, I don't want to struggle forever, or I want financial freedom someday. That's not pain. That's poetry. Pain is specific. Pain has images. Pain has consequences. Pain has a future. You can feel closing in on you if nothing changes. What does your life look like in 5 years if you don't change the way you work? What stress do you carry? Who do you depend on? What opportunities do you miss? What ions do you keep avoiding? When you make the cost of staying the same emotionally real, something shifts. Suddenly, discipline stops feeling heavy. Suddenly, effort feels like relief. Suddenly, action feels better than avoidance. Not because the work got easier, but because the alternative became unacceptable at the same time. Most people have pleasure wired incorrectly too. They think pleasure comes after success, after the money, after the results. So the work feels empty, delayed, pointless in the short term. And the brain hates delayed rewards. It wants pleasure now, comfort now, relief now. So scrolling, entertainment, distraction, and excuses become attractive. Not because they're meaningful, but because they're immediately soothing. Wealthy producers wire pleasure into the process. They associate pride with keeping promises to themselves. They associate satisfaction with progress, not perfection. They associate confidence with showing up when it's hard. So even before the money arrives, they're rewarded emotionally for doing the right thing. That's a game changer. Because once you link pleasure to discipline and pain to regret, your behavior starts to run automatically. You no longer need to force yourself to work, you feel pulled toward it. You don't need to fight distractions, you lose interest in them. The internal debate quiets down. And here's the most important part, this wiring is learned, which means it can be rewired. Every time you avoid work, you reinforce the idea that short-term comfort equals safety. Every time you push through resistance, you teach your nervous system that effort equals power. Over time, those associations become identity. And identity drives everything. So you stop asking, how do I stay motivated? And you start asking, what pain am I avoiding and what pleasure am I chasing? Are you avoiding the discomfort of focus, the discomfort of learning, the discomfort of being seen trying and possibly failing? Or are you chasing the pleasure of approval, ease, and distraction? Because the moment you consciously choose to flip those associations, your energy changes. You start to feel restless when you waste time. You start to feel satisfied when you make progress. You start to feel uneasy when you skip what matters. That's when discipline stops being a fight. And let me be clear about something. This is not about punishing yourself. It's about telling the truth. It's about no longer numbing the consequences of inaction. It's about facing reality with enough emotional intensity that change becomes the obvious response. Most people stay stuck because they keep the pain of staying the same small or the pain of change big. But the truth is, The pain of discipline is temporary. The pain of regret compounds. And when you finally feel that, not intellectually, but emotionally, you don't need someone to push you. You push yourself, because now, not working hurts more than working. Now, procrastination feels worse than effort. Now, showing up feels lighter than hiding. That's when work ethic becomes sustainable. That's when wealth stops feeling like a distant goal and starts feeling like a logical outcome of how you live your life every day. And once pain and pleasure are aligned, momentum takes over. Because when staying the same hurt enough and becoming more feels good enough, you don't need motivation anymore. You've already decided. Now let's clear up one of the biggest lies people tell themselves about success, money, and hard work. They say, I just need to feel motivated. As if motivation is something that shows up randomly, like the weather. As if one day you wake up and suddenly you're driven, focused, unstoppable, and until then you're stuck waiting. That belief alone has cost people years of progress. Because motivation is not something you find. It's something you generate. If motivation were required before action, nothing meaningful would ever get built. No business, no skill, no fortune. Because motivation is emotional and emotions are inconsistent. They change based on sleep, stress, results, and circumstances. If your work ethic depends on how you feel, then your future will always be fragile. Here's what actually happens. Action creates motivation, not the other way around. Think about the last time you didn't want to start something, work, exercise, a difficult conversation. At the beginning, resistance was high. Your mind had reason. Your body LT heavy. But once you took the first small step, something shifted. Momentum appeared. Energy followed. Motivation showed up after you began. That's not coincidence. That's how human psychology works. Most people wait for certainty before they move. But certainty comes from movement. Your nervous system doesn't get excited by intentions. It gets excited by progress, and the smallest action, taken consistently, trains your system to expect results. This is why rituals matter more than inspiration. People who don't rely on mood. They rely on structure. They decide in advance how they will act, regardless of how they feel. They remove decision-making from the moment of resistance. Because every time you debate with yourself, comfort usually wins. You don't ask yourself every morning whether you'll check your phone. It's automatic. That's a ritual. You don't negotiate whether you'll eat. You just do it. That's a ritual. The same must become true with your wealth-building behaviors. When action becomes scheduled, predictable, and identity-based, motivation becomes irrelevant. And here's something most people don't realize. Motivation doesn't disappear, it gets redirected. If you're not motivated to work, you're motivated to avoid discomfort. If you're not motivated to grow, you're motivated to stay familiar. Motivation is always present. The question is what it's serving. So instead of asking, why can't I motivate myself? Ask, what am I currently motivated to protect? CT, your comfort, your ego, your fear of looking foolish, your attachment to immediate relief. Once you see that clearly, you can redirect that energy. One of the fastest ways to create motivation is urgency. Not panic, but urgency with purpose. When time feels unlimited, effort becomes optional. When stakes feel low, discipline feels unnecessary. But when you decide that waiting has consequences, your focus sharpens. You don't rise when it's convenient. You rise when it's necessary. Necessity is a decision. You decide that wasting today is too expensive. You decide that drifting is no longer acceptable. You decide that future you deserve is better than excuses. That decision creates emotional leverage. And emotional leverage fuels motivation. Another piece people overlook is environment. Motivation dies in environments designed for distraction. If everything around you invites comfort, your brain will choose comfort. So the motivated don't rely on self-control alone. They design their surroundings to support action. They remove friction from good habits and add friction to bad ones. They make the right choice easier than the wrong one. Because again, motivation isn't heroic, it's strategic. And let's talk about something even deeper, standard. Your standards, not your goals, determine your behavior. Goals are something you want. Standards are what you demand. When your standard becomes I work every day, no matter what, motivation becomes optional. When you're saint, standard becomes I do what I said I would do. Excuses lose power. Most people have wishes. Very few have standards. The moment you raise your standards, your identity has to catch up, and that tension between who you've been and who you're becoming creates energy. That energy is motivation. You don't need to feel inspired to keep your word. You don't need hype to act in alignment with your values. You need clarity about who you are and what you tolerate. And here's the part that changes everything. Motivation grows when you stack wins, small wins, daily wins. Proof that you are reliable. Every promise you keep, even a small one, strengthens self-trust, and self-trust fuels confidence, and confidence fuels momentum. Most people try to motivate themselves with massive goals while breaking small promises daily. That creates internal conflict. But when you do the opposite, keep small promises consistently, you create internal alignment. And alignment feels powerful. That power is motivation. So stop waiting for the feeling. Build the system. Stop chasing inspiration. Create structure. Stop asking how to feel motivated. Decide how to act. Because the truth is, you don't need more motivation. You need fewer negotiations with yourself. And when action becomes non-negotiable, motivation will meet you there. Let's talk about clarity. Because this is where effort either ignites or dies. Most people think they lack discipline, when in reality they lack direction. They say they want wealth, but what they really have is a foggy idea, a loose wish, a vague hope that somehow life will improve if they just keep going. And vagueness is expensive. Vagueness drains energy. Vagueness kills hunger. The human mind does not mobilize itself for unclear targets. It doesn't strain for someday. It doesn't wake up early for more money. It responds to images, specifics, and emotional meaning. When your vision is unclear, your actions feel optional. When your destination is blurry, your effort weakens. That's not a character flaw. It's how you're wired. Clarity creates tension. And tension creates drive. When you know exactly what you're moving toward, hesitation loses its grip. You don't need someone to push you because you feel pulled. You wake up with a sense of direction. You feel dissatisfaction when you waste time, not because you're punishing yourself, but because you know what that time is supposed to be building. Most people never feel this because they've never sat still long enough to decide what they truly want and why they want it. They borrow goals from social media. They chase numbers. Without meaning, they repeat phrases like financial freedom without defining what that actually looks like in their life, but the brain can't commit to a fantasy. It can't picture. What does wealth look like for you, not in theory and detail? What does your morning look like when money is no longer the bottleneck? Where are you? What does your day feel like? Ooh. Benefits from your success. What pressure disappears? What options open up? When you answer those questions honestly, something powerful happens. The goal stops being external, it becomes personal. And when it's personal, effort becomes emotional. That's hunger. Hunger isn't about desperation. It's about alignment. It's about knowing exactly what you're building and refusing to drift away from it. People who work relentlessly aren't chasing money. They're chasing a future that feels real to them. And here's the part most people miss. Clarity doesn't just define the destination. It defines the standard. When you know where you're going, you know what behavior fits and what doesn't. Certain habits start to feel out of place. Certain distractions lose their appeal. Certain conversations feel like a waste of time, not because you're better than anyone, but because you're committed to something specific. Clarity simplifies decisions. When your vision is weak, every choice feels heavy. When your vision is strong, choices make themselves. You don't debate whether to work late when you know what's at stake. You don't argue with yourself about focus when you know the cost of delay. You don't need constant motivation when you know exactly what today is for. That's why people with clear goals appear disciplined. They're not more disciplined, they're more directed. Now let's address something important. Clarity doesn't mean certainty. You don't need every step figured out. You do and need to know exactly how it will happen. You just need to know why it must happen. The how adjusts as you move. The why anchors you when it gets hard. Most people reverse this. They wait for a perfect plan before they commit. But commitment creates clarity, not the other way around. As you take action, your vision sharpens. As you learn, your target refines. But without an initial decision, nothing evolves. Clarity is not about predicting the future. It's about choosing it. And once you choose, something inside you wakes up. You start measuring days differently. You start asking better questions. You start noticing opportunities you used to ignore. You start feeling uncomfortable with stagnation. That discomfort is not a problem. It's a signal. A signal that you are no longer aligned with drifting. A signal that you've outgrown waiting. And here's the truth. Most people don't want to face. Lack of clarity is often a form of protection. If the vision is vague, failure can't be measured. If the goal is unclear, responsibility stays fuzzy. But clarity removes hiding places. It demands congruence. It forces you to show up. That's why it's powerful and why it's avoided. But the moment you allow yourself to be clear, effort gains meaning. Long hours stop feeling pointless. Sacrifice stops feeling random. You're no longer just working, you're building. And building creates pride. Clarity also creates patience. When you know where you're going, you stop panicking out temporary setbacks. You stop quitting because progress is slower than expected. You understand that momentum compounds. You understand that mastery takes time. And because the vision is solid, you're willing to stay in the process long. Then most, that's where wealth is built, not in bursts of intensity, but in sustained, focused execution guided by a clear direction. So if you ever feel unmotivated, don't ask what's wrong with you. Ask what you're unclear about. Ask what you haven't fully decided. Ask what future you've been afraid to claim. Because once the vision is vivid enough, work stops being a burden and starts being an expression of who you are becoming. And when clarity is locked in, hunger does the rest. Now let's talk about the moment where most people break not because they lack ability, not because they lack opportunity, but because they misunderstand what work ethic actually is. They think it's a personality trait. They think some people are just born grinders and others aren't. That belief alone quietly excuses more unfulfilled potential than almost anything else. Work ethic is not who you are. Work ethic is a decision you make emotionally every single day. You don't wake up with discipline. You wake up with a nervous system. And that nervous system scans the day ahead and asks one simple question: is this safe or is this uncomfortable? If the answer is uncomfortable, most people hesitate. They stall. They distract themselves. Not because they don't want success, but because in that moment, comfort feels more urgent than progress. This is where the gap lies. The difference between people who build wealth and people who talk about it is not knowledge. It's not intelligence. It's not even effort over a lifetime. It's the ability to make the same emotional decision over and over again. I will act even when my body wants relief. Because here's the truth, no one prepares you for working hard is rarely logical in the moment. It doesn't always feel rewarding. It doesn't always feel fair. Sometimes it feels boring. Sometimes it feels lonely. Sometimes it feels pointless. And if your work ethic depends on feeling good, then it will disappear the moment work does not. That's why work ethic must become emotional conditioning, not emotional reaction. Most people assume successful people are constantly motivated. They're not. They've just trained themselves to respond differently to resistance. Where others feel hesitation and pull back, they feel hesitation and lean in. Not because it's pleasant, but because they've decided what hesitation means. To most people, resistance means stop. To high performers, resistance means this matters. That reframe alone changes behavior. Every day, you are training your nervous system how to respond to discomfort. When you quit early, you teach it that discomfort equals danger. When you push through, you teach it that discomfort equals growth. Over time, your body starts ting with your goals instead of fighting them. And this is critical because wealth building is emotionally repetitive. It's not one big heroic push. It's showing up on days when nothing exciting happens. It's staying focused when results are delayed. It's doing the boring, unglamorous work that compounds quietly. Most people can work hard when the emotion is high. Very few can work hard when the emotion is neutral or low. That's the separator. And here's something most people don't want to admit. They don't struggle with work ethic. They struggle with emotional management. They don't know how to regulate frustration. They don't know how to sit with boredom. They don't know how to move forward without reassurance. So they escape, they scroll, they distract. They tell themselves they'll do it later. But later is just comfort in disguise. Work ethic is the willingness to feel discomfort without needing immediate relief. It's the ability to stay present when your mind looks for exits. It's the choice to keep going when there's no applause, no validation, no guarantee. And that choice has to be made daily. Not once, not when it's convenient, but when it counts. This is why wealthy builders structure their days around execution, not emotion. They don't ask, do I feel like it? They ask, what did I commit to? They don't wait for confidence. They let confidence catch up to their behavior because confidence is a byproduct of kept promises every time you follow through. When it's hard, you strengthen self-respect. Every time you avoid the work, you weaken it. Over time, that self-respect becomes fuel. You don't want to break your word, not because someone is watching, but because you are. That's when work ethic becomes internal. And let's be honest, some days the decision will feel heavy. Some days you'll question if it's worth it. Some days you'll feel behind, tired, frustrated. That's not a sign something is wrong. That's the cost of becoming someone new. The mistake is thinking those feelings mean you should stop. They don't. They mean you're right on schedule. The people who win are not the ones who avoid emotional dips. They're the ones who don't let emotional dips dictate behavior. They understand that feelings are temporary, but habits compound, and over time, something powerful happens. The emotional weight shifts. What once felt hard becomes familiar. What once felt uncomfortable becomes routine. What once required force begins to require less effort. Not because the work changed, but because you did. Work ethic stops feeling like strain and starts feeling like identity. You no longer push yourself, you express yourself. You no longer rely on hype, you rely on standards. And standards don't argue. When your standard is execution, excuses sound hollow. When your standard is progress, distractions lose appeal. When your standard is growth, comfort feels like stagnation. This is the moment where wealth stops being something and you chase and starts being something you earn daily. Because at the end of the day, wealth doesn't reward intention. It rewards the person who shows up when emotions say no and discipline says move. And that decision made daily is what separates potential from results. Now we come to the point where everything either locks in or falls apart. Because this is where people tell themselves the story that sounds reasonable, responsible, even mature. They say, I'm comfortable right now. And they don't realize that comfort is the most expensive place a human being can live. Comfort is not peace. Comfort is not stability. Comfort is often just slow decay disguised as safety. Nothing kills hunger faster than comfort. Nothing dulls urgency more quietly. Nothing convinces intelligent, capable people to settle for less with such convincing logic. Comfort doesn't shout. It whispers. It says, you can do it tomorrow. It says, this isn't that bad. It says, at least you're not struggling like before. And while you're listening, time is passing. Wealth is not built in moments of ease. It's built the moment comfort stops being an option. Look at every major turning point in a person's life, every breakthrough, every transformation. There is always a moment where staying the same becomes more painful than changing. Not inconvenient, unacceptable. That's when standards rise. That's when excuses collapse. That's when action becomes non-negotiable until that moment arrives. People stay stuck, not because they can't move, but because they don't have. 2. Comfort keeps the nervous system calm, but it also keeps potential dormant. It trains you to prioritize feeling okay over becoming more. And as long as comfort is acceptable, urgency will always be optional. This is why people can talk about wealth for years without moving toward it. They're not desperate enough to change, and they're not dissatisfied enough to disrupt their routine. They live in the middle where dreams exist, but demands don't. And the middle is dangerous because the middle convinces you you're making progress when you're actually just maintaining. It gives you just enough relief to avoid discomfort, but not enough fulfillment to feel alive. It keeps you busy without making you bold. Wealth demands boldness, and boldness doesn't grow in comfort, it grows in constraint. When comfort is removed, focus sharpens. When safety is questioned, creativity activates. When ease disappears, resolve appears. This is not about suffering for the sake of suffering. This is about understanding that growth requires pressure. Muscles don't grow without resistance. Skills don't sharpen without challenge. Character doesn't form without discomfort. And wealth, real wealth, doesn't accumulate without moments where you choose long-term freedom over short-term relief. Most people wait for comfort to increase before they take risks, but the people who do the opposite, they voluntarily step into discomfort before life forces them there. They choose discipline before desperation. They choose pressure now so they don't live under pressure later. That choice changes everything, because once comfort is no longer the goal, your priorities shift. You stop asking what's easiest and start asking what's necessary. You stop optimizing for convenience and start optimizing for growth. You stop protecting your current lifestyle and start building your future one. And here's the uncomfortable truth: comfort is addictive. Once your nervous system gets used to ease, it resists anything that threatens it, even opportunity, even progress, even success. That's why people self-sabotage right before breakthroughs. That's why they hesitate when things start working. That's why they pull back when the stakes rise, because comfort doesn't want to be challenged. So if you want wealth, you must consciously decide that comfort will no longer be the ruler of your decisions. Not eliminated, but dethroned. It cannot be the thing you serve. It must become something you earn after effort, not something you protect instead of effort. This is where standards matter again. When your standard becomes growth, comfort becomes secondary. When your standard becomes progress, ease becomes optional. When your standard becomes expansion, staying small feels wrong. And when staying small feels wrong, action becomes natural. This is the moment where people stop needing motivation, because motivation was never the problem. Comfort was. Once comfort is no longer an option, procrastination loses power. Excuses feel embarrassing. Delay feels dangerous. You stop asking if you're ready and start asking if you're willing to feel awkward, willing to feel stretched, willing to feel uncertain, because uncertainty is temporary. Regret is not. And something profound happens when you live this way. You stop fearing hard days because you know they're building something. You stop resenting effort because you see where it leads. You stop romanticizing ease because you've tasted growth. That's when momentum takes over. The work no longer feels like punishment. The pressure no longer feels personal. The discomfort no longer feels threatening. It feels purposeful. And purpose is fuel. Wealth responds to that energy, not because the world is fair, but because disciplined action compounds, because focused effort multiplies, because consistency under pressure creates outcomes that comfort never could. So if you're waiting to feel more comfortable before you go all in, you're waiting in the wrong direction. The question is not when comfort will arrive. The question is when you'll decide that staying comfortable is costing you too much. Because the moment comfort stops being an option, growth becomes inevitable.